In Space Station 14, Syndicate agents and nuclear operatives may want to purchase melee weapons. There actually aren't too many melee weapons to choose from, but knowing what they do and how their stats work can be pretty helpful. The cheapest melee weapon that you can purchase costs a singular Teller Crystal, the Cybersun Pen. You can find these in quite a few places. The Cybersun Pen actually has quite a lot going for it. It can actually edit papers that are stamped, so you can do forgery with it. It actually acts as a screwdriver, so if you lose your screwdriver or just want this as your screwdriver, you can use it that way. It's a pen, so you can fit it in your pen slot and your PDA like so. So it's rather concealable, and people don't really freak out about it because salvage can find these like candy. They're everywhere. The Cybersun Pen, surprisingly, does 15 pierce a hit. It has default attack speed, which is 1 swing a second, so it only has 15 pierce damage a second, which isn't bad DPS. Like, compared to the common weapons of the station, which is a baseball bat, which, admittedly, the baseball bat actually is pretty concealable, but in order to get the full 15 blunt damage, which blunt isn't as desirable of a damage, you need 2 hands, but it does do structural. But again, this is 1 TC, so the fact that it's a competitively viable melee weapon that takes up a 1x1 is very concealable. And yeah, it's contraband, but I think even on LRP, you'd have a hard time getting permit for this. When Space Law comes out, like, this will barely count as a contraband weapon. It does hurt. It's a sharp pen, but it's just a pen. Also, weapons like the Plasma Shiv still actually don't do as much DPS as the Cybersun Pen, so just for a one-handed option, the Cybersun Pen is still one of the best melee weapons in the game. Onto the 2 Telecrystal purchase. This is where you get some interesting options if you up your budget a little bit. The Syndicate Jaws of Life actually does a surprising 14 blunt, so 1 less than the pen. It is a crowbar and a wire cutter all in one. It only takes up a 2x2 in your inventory, so it's basically like baseball bat levels of damage. The Jaws of Life can pry open doors that you don't have access to, and it doesn't take all that long, even if they're powered, so you don't need hacking tools, you don't need insulated gloves. It's very versatile. It does 14 blunt damage, so 14 DPS, does not swing faster, but it's a very versatile tool. This will get you arrested. It's a contraband item, but people don't often use it as a weapon despite it actually doing pretty good damage. But it being a weapon is not its primary function. It just happens to do extra damage. The Syndicate Suspicious Toolbox actually does 20 damage a hit, not including the fact that it comes with a Syndicate gas mask, insulated gloves, and a full tool belt. For only 2 telecrystals, this is a very, very good purchase. But anyways, the box itself does 20 damage a second, 20 blunt. Problem is, you can't store it, so you must hold it in your hand, and it is a valid weapon. However, this Suspicious Toolbox also does spawn in places like maintenance, meaning that you might not automatically be arrested for it on the spot. It is often underestimated as a weapon despite the fact that it has 20 DPS and it's blunt, so it's a pretty good gibbing tool. Like, I don't really like gibbing all that much. I think gibbing's kind of a weird mechanic in general, but blunt damage is very good for gibbing, and it's like if security's wearing their bulletproof armor, well, that doesn't do much against blunt. If they're wearing a SWAT armor, you don't want this, but I digress. 20 DPS blunt damage in the toolbox. Now onto the energy pen. Just like the Cybersun Pen, you can write with it. It doesn't forge documents, and you can hide it. It's also not apparent that there's anything wrong with it. You have to press Z to pull it out. You have to press Z to turn it on, and it does 10/10 heat. So now we're in the higher DPS territory. It's the same as the Sus Toolbox. You actually can store it in your inventory while it's turned on. I don't know why you would do that, but if you turn it off, it's a 1x1. But this is 20 DPS, 10/10 heat. It's unfortunate that it does heat, though, because that means it cauterizes. You won't make anyone bleed with it. But heat and slash is a good damage duo because it's very rare that you resist both at the same time. Actually, I don't think any armor resists both equally. Like, I think Nuki's armor does, but you're not fighting. You're probably really not going to be fighting somebody wearing a blood red if they're wearing this. I think security hard suits are also equal slash and heat protection. Actually, probably has more heat protection. But anyway, it's another 20 DPS weapon. Problem is, it's very loud. Anyone who hears that sound will probably just think you have an E-sword or an E-pen. Anyone who sees a sprite of you walking around with this glowing makes you automatically valid, so that's worth considering. So the extra benefit of energy swords and daggers is they both have a 25% chance of reflecting non-energy and energy bullets. So that means disabler rounds or shotgun rounds or WT-550, whatever it might be. So it does actually give you some defensive ability as well as being a pretty good offensive option. And just for consistency's sake, I'm going to walk 8, 9, 10, 11 tiles away, and it's basically off screen. I can still hear this thing clear as day. Even if I go into like maintenance, I can still hear it perfectly echolocating to my south. So it's just not a very stealthy weapon, and especially if the person's attacking, like, it's just super, super obvious there's an energy weapon. I'm almost 2 screens away at this point, and I can still faintly hear it. And when they're attacking, it's just super, super obvious. So like I said, this is basically the you're going to get valid hunted if you pull it out weapon, so that makes it a pretty risky cost, but it is only 2 telecrystals. Onto the 4 telecrystal option, we have a interesting group of weapons here. None of these are directly weapons, but the advanced circular saw is what we're after. The advanced scalpel also does a decent bit of damage, so you can actually take both out of this if you want, but we're going to be talking about the circular saw. Circular saw is only a 1x2, so it's very compact. It doesn't automatically make you as valid as these other options. It's probably the least valid weapon here. I don't think they're strictly Syndicate. The nice thing about it is that there's nothing in the description that mentions it's Syndicate related. It's just an advanced circular saw. It also is very interesting. It does 5 blunt, slash, and piercing, but it attacks 1.5 times a second. So it actually has a pretty great DPS of 22.5 damage a second due to its attack speed, and having multi-damage types means that you will do bleeding, you're not cauterizing. This only costs 4 telecrystals. You could ditch the bag, you could even keep the things like you could keep the drill, you could keep the cautery, you can even use the roller bed if you have a use for it. You can hide your fingerprints with nitro gloves. It's not a terrible bundle for 4 telecrystals. It does more DPS than every weapon prior to it on the category. It's not too far behind the DPS of the 8 telecrystal options, and like I said, it's kind of a stealthy weapon. Like, it's loud, but it's not an automatically valid sound, and it's not labeled as a Syndicate item, so it's rather interesting in that use, and the multi-damage is great for making people bleed. The 8 telecrystal options don't really have bleeding in the mix, so it's very competitive for the top-end melee options. Doesn't have as good a DPS, but it can bleed, and it's not as obvious as these two. So we move on to the iconic energy sword. The energy sword is very iconic, 15/15 heat, only attacks once a second, so 30 DPS. It cannot bleed because it automatically cauterizes, but the energy sword also does structural, so you can break basic walls, basic doors with it, with relative ease. The energy sword, like the energy pen, has the same reflect chance, 25% of the same categories, and it's basically just as loud. So anyone who hears this, you're automatically valid. But this is a good mix between offense and defense. It does 7 more DPS than the circular saw, but it can't bleed. The damage types are more commonly resisted, and it's very loud. But it does structure damage and reflects, so it's worth considering this option. For nukies, this is pretty good because you don't want to be getting shot, so reflecting is always strong. And then finally, we have the gloves of the Northstar. They do 8 blunted damage, but they're actually not a melee weapon. They are gloves. So you can't have insulated gloves with them. You can't hack with them, but you could always just swap them. I mean, gloves are only a 1x2 in your inventory, so very easy to keep with you. Thing is, though, it makes you pretty obvious you have them on at any times because you have a blue hand and a white hand. But the gloves attack at 4 attacks a second, and its major benefit is it has auto swinging, so you can just hold left or right click. It actually does have a wide swing, and I think this looks really goofy. But if I'm aiming up here, I can wide swing targets I'm not even looking at. So, like, this thing's actually a pretty solid room sweeper. I'm able to hit 3 targets at once with 32 DPS with blunt. And since they're gloves, if you get knocked down or disarmed, you don't drop them. You could even have, like, a wielded L6 saw in your hands, and then just drop it, and then you don't even have to pull out a new weapon. You just start swinging automatically, because it's not a weapon, you just swing your bare hand. This is probably still the strongest melee weapon in the game. It has better damage than an energy sword. Yeah, if anyone hears you attacking that fast, they're going to automatically assume you have these gloves, or they assume it's a hollow parasite. But it still requires people to actually physically look at you to see it. It's not like an energy sword where you just hear it and you know. So there's a stealth element to it. Also, people have to literally be staring at a few pixels on your hands to even realize they're about to get beat to death within 3 seconds. Also, it's the best gibbing tool in the game. It does the most blunt damage per second. It's even better than the sus toolbox. So if you're going to buy a high-end melee weapon, the Gloves of the Northstar is probably just better than the E-Sword for damage. Better damage types. Yeah, you don't do structural, but you attack so freaking fast. You don't use a hand slot, so you're always prepared. It's just really, really good in practically any scenario. You'll see the top-end Syndicate players purchase this practically every time. Just having a melee weapon you can't lose on you at all times, ready to fight people. Blunt is probably the least resisted armor type damage in the game, so it's just really, really good. The automatic wide swing is just gross. You just keep punching until your target is into paste. I, again, don't encourage gibbing people, but if it's your kill target, you can beat them to death and gib them in very, very fast time. I mean, here, I'll just punch this guy until he's gibbed. It really does not take much effort to gib somebody with these gloves. But yeah, that is it. That is every single Syndicate melee weapon and tools that do high melee damage explained. Hopefully this gives you more informed decisions of what to purchase in the future. And yes, both Nukies and Syndicate agents can purchase all of these. Syndicates actually get some of these for free. Like, you get Advanced Circular Saw for free if you're the agent, I believe. I think the agent does spawn with this. So some of these you don't even have to pay for if you're a Nuki. And yeah, thank you for watching.